Imagine this. You wake in the dead of night, your skin slick with sweat, your breath ragged. The room is dark, too dark. There's a weight pressing against your chest, something unseen, something alive. You try to move, but your limbs won't obey. A whisper slithers into your ear. Your own voice, but warped, guttural, speaking words you've never thought, in a language you've never known. This is sleep paralysis, they tell you. A trick of the mind, a misfiring brain. But what if it isn't? What if in those hollow hours between midnight and dawn, something else uses your voice? Something that has waited, patient as a grave, for you to finally listen. History is littered with accounts of people who heard their souls speak, not in metaphor, but in shrieks, in pleas, in prophecies that came true in the most grotesque ways. The ancient Greeks feared the eidolon, the phantom self that could detach and wander. Medieval mystics wrote of the homo interior, the inner man who knew truths the waking mind could not bear. And in the 20th century, psychologists like Carl Jung documented patients who spoke in tongues, channeling voices that were theirs, and yet not theirs at all. What if the soul isn't some abstract essence, but a living, writhing thing inside you? And what if one day it decides to answer? The terror isn't in the unknown. It's in the moment you realize you were never alone in your own mind, and now it's listening back. Why does the soul speak, and why does it so often sound like a stranger? Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of the psyche we bury, the reservoir of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It's not evil, it's honest, and when it breaks through, it doesn't whisper, it screams. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of the abyss gazing back. But what if the abyss isn't out there? What if it's coiled inside you? A silent passenger in your bones, waiting for the moment your guard drops. History's darkest atrocities weren't committed by monsters. They were carried out by ordinary people who let something else take the wheel. The banality of evil is just the soul's voice, muffled by denial. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, wrote of the last freedom, the power to choose one's response. But what if that freedom is an illusion? What if, under enough pressure, the soul rewrites you? The Stanford prison experiment proved it takes only days for ordinary men to become tyrants. The Milgram obedience studies revealed how easily we surrender our will to authority. These weren't flukes. They were glimpses into the default state of the human mind when the soul is ignored. And then there's the uncanny, that creeping sense that something is off, that the face in the mirror isn't quite yours. Freud called it das Unheimliche, the familiar-made alien. But philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre took it further. What if the horror isn't that we're haunted, but that we are the haunters? That the self is a fragile fiction, papering over something far older, far hungrier. The soul doesn't speak in words. It speaks in compulsions, in dreams that feel like memories, in the sudden, inexplicable rage that rises like a tide. Where did that come from? The answer is simple. It came from you. The other you, the one you've been pretending doesn't exist, and it's getting louder. Consider this. Every culture, every religion, every civilization whispers of possession, not by demons, but by the self unmasked. The ancient Egyptians feared the Ka, the shadow self that could outlive the body. Tibetan Buddhists speak of tulpas, thought forms so real they take on a life of their own. Even modern psychiatry grapples with dissociative identity disorder. Fractured souls housed in one skull, each with its own voice, its own will. This is not superstition. It is survival. Because the moment the soul begins to speak, reality bends. The 1950s CMK Ultra experiments proved that under enough sensory deprivation, the mind turns on itself. Subjects reported hearing voices, seeing entities, experiencing memories that weren't theirs. But what if the experiment wasn't creating madness, just removing the walls that kept it contained? And then there are the cases that defy explanation. The Watsaka Wonder, a 19th century girl who awoke speaking as a dead woman, recalling details no one could have known. The Tamil Bride of India, a woman who, after a near-death experience, began writing in a language she'd never learned, a dead dialect last spoken centuries before her birth. These aren't ghost stories. They are recorded medical phenomena, documented by skeptics and believers alike. The horror isn't that these things happen, it's that they happen all the time. Every déjà vu, every intrusive thought, every nightmare that lingers like a stain. These are the soul's fingerprints. The brain is a filter, a dam holding back the flood. But cracks form, and when they do, something looks back. The question isn't if the soul will speak. It's what happens when you answer. There is a way out, but you won't like it. The ancient mystics knew it. The shamans, the monks, the poets who walked the edge of madness, they all understood one terrifying truth. To silence the soul, you must first let it scream. Jung called it shadow work. The Buddhists named it sitting with the demon. Modern psychology disguises it as integration therapy. But the core remains the same. You do not fight the voice. You listen. History's survivors all share this trait. Viktor Frankl stared into the abyss of Auschwitz and spoke back, not with defiance, but with meaning. Nietzsche, crumbling under migraines and visions, didn't suppress them. He wrote, "From them, birthing Zarathustra from the depths of his unraveling mind." Even the CIA's MK Ultra victims who didn't break had one common thread. They accepted the voices as part of themselves. This is the paradox. The only way to reclaim control is to surrender the illusion of it, because the soul doesn't want to destroy you. It wants recognition. Every nightmare, every irrational burst of rage, every eerie whisper in the dark, it's a disowned piece of you, clawing its way to the surface. The alcoholic doesn't drink because he's weak. He drinks because a wounded part of him refuses to stay buried. The tyrant doesn't crave power. He's running from the powerlessness his soul won't let him forget. The way out isn't an exorcism, it's a conversation. Here is the secret no one wants to hear. You were never the one speaking. From the first breath, it was never just you in the driver's seat. The soul isn't some passive essence. It's the older you, the primal will that existed before language, before morality, before the fragile mask of identity was stitched together. Every choice you believe you've made, every thought you claim as your own, how do you know it wasn't it whispering all along? The final horror isn't that the soul speaks, it's that you might just be its echo. Consider the cases of sudden, inexplicable transformation. The loving father who snaps and annihilates his family, the recluse who emerges from solitude with prophecies scorched into their skin. These aren't possessions, they're awakenings, the moment the soul bypasses the filters and takes over. This is why the mystics trembled. Not because God spoke to them, but because they realized they were the ones being spoken through. So here is the question that will haunt you long after this ends. If the soul is the true voice, who have you been talking to this whole time?